Welcome to the College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line. Here's Shehan J. Haraja and Bobak Hayeri.
Hey everybody, it's a College Football Survivor Show. I'm Bobak Hayeri with my co-host Shehan J. Haraja, national college football writer for CBS Sports. We are glad to have you with us. This is, well, first of all, happy Thanksgiving, everyone. This is probably coming out on Thanksgiving Day. We're recording this the Wednesday before, but it is a good holiday weekend, and it's always been a weekend full of exciting football. One FBS Thursday game, which I think is still too short. I know it's Thanksgiving, but we could have got more, but we do have a good one. We'll get to talking about the games coming up in the second half of the show. Then we got games on Friday. We got games on Saturday. Divided up enough that maybe you can spread your interest around and watch a lot of these games as you enjoy family, tolerate family, however you decide to do it, or just go out on your own. I know I got some barbecue that just arrived, so I'm going to be having some good food, non-turkey for us. But all of that said, week four, the fourth week of the college football playoff rankings are out, so we're going to take a look at those, some of the moves that have happened, some of the things that have been set up from them, and then we'll, of course, take a look at some of the important games coming up in week 14. But before we dive in, let me remind you, you can find us on X and TikTok at CFP Survivor Show, where we have video highlights of the show, run polls, and listen to your feedback. Take a moment, if you can, to like, rate, and subscribe to us wherever you find us. We appreciate that, and we appreciate you listening to us now. But all of that said, happy Thanksgiving, Shehan. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm ready for a day away from everything. I will say, though, it is killing me that we only have one college football game on Thanksgiving. Like, what are we doing here? It's only Memphis versus Tulane, which is a pretty good game, but I kind of think Tulane might win by a lot. Like, we don't have the Egg Bowl this year. Obviously, I would have preferred that Texas versus Texas A&M be on Thanksgiving as well. Like, what are we doing? We're just ceding ground to the NFL right now.
It is. It's ridiculous. If we give them an inch, they take the whole arm. You can't do that. You just can't. So one thing I wanted to mention as we kind of dive into this, because we got a lot of material to get through. It's funny how we've talked about each week our Survivor Island, which we create, and we have some specific rules. We have to include at least, well, basically 5 conference champs is really how everyone's now. First of all, I just want to say there's a couple of things to this. We've talked about how those of us, especially if you've listened to this show through the offseason or followed college football as fanatically as many of us who cover it do, you've known that the way the playoff was written was the top 5 conference champs. People, I think, on a surface level, were initially assuming it was going to be the P4 and then a G5 at the 12th spot. And in the last few weeks, this week included, everyone's now realizing that the G5 champ could very well be one of the top 4 seeds. Now, in the past week, and I'm actually impressed this is coming up because I thought this was still going to be in the minutia that wasn't really going to potentially come up this season. People are becoming aware that there's a possibility 2 G5 champs could be in there. Therefore, one of the P4, supposed P4, would be left out. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. All of that said, it has been fascinating to watch how the college football ranking and our particular playoff ranking have become, or I should say our survivor ranking have become very close. At this point, there's literally only one difference between the college football playoff rankings and our island. And that's simply because we have to include one of each of the P4. So we included Arizona State, and the 12th spot in the college football rankings right now is Clemson. And the best part about that is being 12th in the college football playoff rankings doesn't mean Clemson's in. It means they would get bumped for Arizona State because Arizona State is currently the highest ranked Big 12 team, which would put them into the college football playoff. I mean, it's fantastic. I mean, part of me wants to say, like, there are things to talk about, potentially things to complain about, but what a remarkable result. This has been absolutely fantastic in the first year of the 12-team playoff, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think we've been exactly right almost since the beginning. You know, first of all, with the way that we've handled it, I think that we've also tried to do a good job of setting people up for the understanding of how the system was going to work. I think that our listeners probably are not the ones looking around saying, wait, why is Arizona State in? What do you mean Clemson's 12? Why aren't they in the field? And I think that that's been a real positive thing, is that I think that our listeners have been a little bit more prepared for some of the nuances of the committee. I think also, as we head into this last little bit, I mean, we've been talking about since the beginning too, the idea that it's the top 5 conference champions and not the power conference champions who are guaranteed spots in the playoffs. So, of course, right now we have Boise State as the number 11 team in the country, jumping up to the 4 seed. And right now, the Big 12 is not looking so hot if you look at their positioning, because yes, right now, Arizona State as the number 16 team is the 12 seed. They're only one spot ahead of fellow two-loss team Tulane from the AAC, who is the favorite to win the AAC. And all of the other Big 12 two-loss teams are actually behind Tulane. I do want to ask about this for 1 second. So and this is like, obviously for me, I love Group of Five, and like I want them to get a little more credit than they usually get. But like, it's a little crazy to me that the Big 12 has 5 ranked teams, right? Like, so they're considered a good conference. But you look at Tulane, who lost to a Big 12 team in Kansas State, also lost another game to Oklahoma in the non-conference slate, that they're being treated essentially as equal as a 2-loss team or better to the Big 12 2-loss teams, right? Like, you have Kansas State as a 3-loss team, is in the rankings, I believe, at number 24, but like Tulane is ahead of 2-loss Iowa State, who has a win over Iowa, and like they're ahead of. The crazy one to me, and I just will never understand exactly how the committee has treated this team. Like, BYU still has a top 10 victory against number 9 SMU and one over number 24 Kansas State. Now, look, I don't think BYU at this point should feel comfortable that they'll be in the top 12, but like, I don't really get the logic of BYU at number 19 and Tulane at number 17. Like, because I think that usually when we wonder about the placement of a team, the answer is either 1, the committee likes their wins, or 2, the committee likes their analytic profile. And I don't think that is something that would be the case of Tulane necessarily. Like, I don't think that they're a team who's just blowing away the metrics, and that they just look so dominant versus the rest of the field. Just for comparison, look, this is actually probably a little higher than I expected, but Tulane is number 17 in the FPI, right? But like, I don't know. Is that's like, I guess, and I will give them the credit. Like, Kansas State right now is 22, Colorado's 24. So maybe it's just that the analytics don't like the Big 12 very much. But I can't think of an example of the last time that I saw a Group of 5 team, who, by the way, has a loss to a conference team from another conference, be treated, I guess, as like equal to a power conference schedule. And congratulations, Big 12. You make history every day.
I think it's a fascinating shift, because I know, for example, in the past couple of weeks with Boise State as the number 4 seed, we said this is going to be a nice temporary opportunity to realize it's possible, because inevitably, especially before last weekend, we knew if it was going to end up being BYU versus Colorado, who we had both assumed were going to probably win out, but clearly they have not. The winner of that was going to boost itself above, and they would end up being the 4 seed. Not saying they'd be that high in the top 12, but they'd be higher than Boise State. But now, now the shift is, can the Big 12 even make it? I think Notre Dame saved them a little bit, because by knocking down Army, it was kind of a lose-lose for Notre Dame. It was a ranked victory in that moment, but by beating them, they were almost inevitably going to knocking Army out. And they did in the CFP. They knocked Army completely out. So I think, unless, and I say this because with a huge grain of salt, because we all know that we're just begging chaos again, and the Big 12 has been haunted by chaos. But if there isn't total chaos, or we end up with like a West Virginia somehow ending up in the Big 12 championship game, or one of these, or Baylor, no offense, like that just ends up in the Big 12 championship game, we're probably going to end up with 2 decently ranked teams. They're not going to be, Tulane is stuck if they play Army, because Army's way back there. What's the best they're going to get out of it? They're not going to get much of a boost. Army plays UTSA. Tulane does play a 9-win Memphis team that has not quite been what people expected Memphis to be, but they're still favored by nearly 2 touchdowns in that game. So it's not going to necessarily move the needle a ton, but it'll at least maybe move Tulane at best, let's say up to 16. But they're not going to be able, their roof isn't really there. It's what we've been talking about with Ole Miss. They don't have any room to move up. They're playing Mississippi State. It ain't going to help them. It ain't going to help their rankings at all unless a bunch of people lose ahead of them. So assuming there isn't another week of just like legendary 2007 called chaos that occurs in this final week in the Big 12, I think we're going to end up with a Big 12 title game that should be enough to boost that team above Tulane. Because again, as you pointed out, Arizona State 16, Iowa State 18, BYU 19, Kansas State 24, Colorado 25. If any of those teams wins enough to get in against and play each other, whichever two of those play each other, assuming they've won this week's game, I think that will be the now, of course, all the joy that the ACC's had, and maybe we'll get to that in a second, the Big 12 has absolutely put themselves, they are one bid league. There's literally no way. I mean, I'm going to just say, I cannot think of any other way another Big 12 team is going to get in. But it is fascinating to see how impossible. The travails of the Big 12 have kind of made people warm up to the idea of, some people were, the G5 shouldn't even be part of the 12-team playoff. Well, boy, now that whole conversation got put away. Because I remember we were all talking about that, especially after last season when the G5 had the worst cannibalism in their history. So Liberty ended up a very unqualified team that people were, even wondering if a 2-loss SMU should go ahead of them, just completely embarrassed itself in the Fiesta Bowl against Oregon. Now everyone was worried like this season, next season, before they get a chance to revisit this 12-team format, will they then, box out the G5? The G5 has done everything they can to make sure that is not in the conversation. I mean, honestly, it started with 2 games. It started with Boise State nearly knocking off Oregon and NIU knocking off Notre Dame. Those 2 set the tone for the whole season, I think. And I think it's been wonderful for them. But yeah, I think the Big 12 will be okay. But I love the fact, I was shocked. I do a call-in show on like Tuesday evening after the rankings come out. I was shocked how many people wanted to like talk about Tulane. And I'm like, people were worried in the Big 12. And I'm like, okay, slow down. I think what more would be likely for Tulane to get in is something goes wrong with the Mountain West, which certainly can, because at this point we have 2 games to round out the Mountain West competition. Big Boise State, they play an out-of-conference game with Oregon State, and then UNLV plays Nevada for the battle for the Fremont Cannon. Nevada's been, UNLV should win that. So we're going to get a rematch. If UNLV wins that, actually, they'll probably have a shot at getting in. But if chaos reigns and somehow Nevada knocks off UNLV, Colorado State might have an opportunity to go in. If there's enough of a mess in the Mountain West, that'll be Tulane's way to get in. But I don't think they'll ever get a chance of passing the likely eventual Big 12 champ.
Yeah, it's an interesting position to be in. I mean, again, the more that I look at this data, again, I keep coming back to it over and over again, but I really mean it. Like, I just don't get how BYU's been treated through this whole process. Like, obviously, when they were undefeated for so long, and we could talk about, from a power rating perspective, they didn't rate the highest, but like their resume was what it was. I mean, they were like number 6 in strength of record for a long time, and they were just not treated like that at all. Now, I mean, even I think that you can compare them to teams in their own conference. Like, obviously, Arizona State should be ahead of them, but like, I don't really get why Iowa State is 1 spot ahead of BYU. Like, you look at a metric even like SP plus. Like, Kansas State is actually the highest ranked Big 12 team in SP plus at number 16. BYU's at number 18. Iowa State's at number 20. You look at things like strength of record. Like, again, and this is in your own conference, but like BYU is number 13 right now in strength of record. So like, I don't really get it. And I will also say too, I feel like this is also probably one of those moments where we've talked about, I mean, the bottom of the Big 12 came to play and the top of the Big 12 didn't when it came to the preseason rankings, right? Like, if these teams are exactly the same, but they're Utah or Oklahoma State, like, I think that maybe they're viewed a little bit differently than like this sort of oddity that popped up. Because I think that the other thing too, the one sort of long-term existential thing for the Big 12 is that outside of maybe Utah and Kansas State, I don't know that there's any teams in the league that you kind of default to. And what I mean by that is, like, you look at the ACC right now. I mean, I don't know from a pure resume perspective, like, who's done anything all that impressive. But, like, Clemson as a 2-loss team is Clemson, right? Like, you recognize them. They've played for titles in the past 10 years. And even though they're actually 18th in strength of record behind Iowa State, 3 spots behind Arizona State, 5 spots behind BYU, they're the first team out right now. And they have a chance to make it in. Now they'll have to beat South Carolina, which there's a whole other South Carolina conversation that we are not going to have today because there is just a lot going on there. But so they will probably have to earn it if they do manage to get in. But like, they're already being treated like a playoff caliber team when you look at their resume right now. And like, since they lost by 12 points to Louisville, it's a 10-point loss or a 10-point win at Virginia Tech. Okay. A 4-point win at Pitt. Okay. Like, that's the case that you beat Florida State by 16, that you beat Virginia by 17. Like, that's what we're saying and doing here. I don't know. It's fascinating, but I think that, again, like, this is also, I think, the reality of a Big 12 that is essentially starting from scratch from a brand perspective, because there will be teams, in my opinion, and we'll have to see how the next few years go. There will be teams that establish themselves as the consistent teams year over year. I think Kansas State is definitely going to be one of those teams. I still believe that probably one of the teams from Texas will probably do that. We'll see if Oklahoma State can get back to that. Maybe Arizona State's going to stick around if Kenny Dillingham's there for a while. But I think that right now there's sort of this level of like, well, what have you done? Like not just this year, but historically. Like, why should I look at Arizona State and think that this is a team that compete in the playoff? And I think that is a sort of perception gap that may prove really costly in this first year of the Big 12 in the college football playoff.
You know, it's fascinating. You brought up a couple of things I wanted to touch on. Number one, I think Kansas State is unfortunately being affected by the sort of recentism in the rankings, because they did lose 2 of their last 3 games. And I think that is sitting in the head of the committee. And beating Cincinnati in the previous week isn't something that isn't going to move the needle much, as I like to say a lot. Now, it's interesting. 2 teams that I think, well, one team I was going to definitely mention, but Clemson is certainly the other, benefited from the fact that they played a complete patsy this past week. Because again, Clemson, wow, they beat up the Citadel. Who in FBS can't beat up the Citadel? You know, I mean, it's no disrespect to them, but I mean, it's just like they're not even a good FCS team, but they're always a popular sort of like tune-up opponent coming out of Charleston. So Tennessee, meanwhile, last week we were completely writing them off. I mean, I remember you wrote like Tennessee's in trouble in your own analysis of it. You know, they had a serious win against Alabama, which now doesn't look that great because Alabama sucks this season. Again, don't come at me, Crimson Tide fans. I respect Alabama, but
they kinda,
you know what I mean when I say that.
They kind of suck in general. Like,
yeah, you all know what I mean when I say that. All right. So I mean, well, they lost to Georgia, and then the rest of their resume is terrible. But because they completely blew out a UTEP team that hasn't been great in their first-year head coach, yeah, great. It was the biggest margin of victory of an FBS team this last week, but it was against basically a team that's just this side of FCS. So Clemson and Tennessee are being rewarded for scheduling complete jokes in the late season, and the ranking committee doesn't know what to do with that. So, you're absolutely right, especially when you're comparing Tennessee against maybe even some of the other SEC teams. Is it really just because they have 2 losses and they're in the SEC? That's what we're giving them credit for. Or Clemson, because they're named Clemson. Tennessee, I mean, no disrespect to Tennessee. I think people still think of Tennessee as 1998. It's just this team that should be good. And I don't know if they're good. I don't know if they're good enough. And, it's not quite the matchup with South Carolina, but Tennessee is going to get an interesting game with Vandy because Vandy suddenly looks great, or not great, but better than the normal Vandy. It's certainly not your parents, grandparents, or great grandparents Vandy playing out there right now. So it'll be interesting to see how that comes out. Speaking of which, going back, just keeping with the ACC for a minute, as you pointed out in your own writings on how on CBSSports.com, there has been the ACC benefited the most from all of this. I mean, it looks like they have gone from being at one point we were talking about them and maybe the Big 12 as being a 1-bid league to being a potentially 3-bid league.
Yeah, and I think here's the thing too, right? Is like if you are on the bubble, you're in good shape. Like this is not a very good bubble, year over year, and that's going to be something that I think that the ACC is going to be able to take advantage of in a positive way. The other thing too, and I mean, again, obviously, I live in Big 12 country, and so I hear a lot of it from people. Like I think that this sort of shows there are opportunities, I think, and there will continue to be opportunities, I think, for whether it is, Tulane as a second group of 5 team, whether it is a further Big 12 team in the future. Like I think that what's going to be most interesting about this moment in college football history is I think that first of all, we're going to have teams go into the playoff and lose that we don't expect. Like everybody wants to sit here and be like, well, Indiana can't contend with Ohio State. Why are we even doing this? Indiana might be able to hang with like a Tennessee. Indiana might be able to hang with this version of Alabama. And I think that seeing those teams actually lose on the field to unexpected opponents is going to be pretty powerful for people. I think back even to again, everybody talks about how the 2022 season ended. TCU beat Michigan in a playoff game, right? Like that happened. I know that we love to forget that happened, but that was a thing that happened. And I mean, again, even I think back to like the Alabama Cincinnati game. Like Cincinnati was not blown off the field. The final score, Alabama pulled away, but like Alabama was essentially 2 throws from winning the national championship, and Cincinnati was very much in that game. We've had years where like there isn't necessarily a super dominant team, and I don't think that there necessarily is this year. And so I really do think that we have this perception that guides how we view the playoff and what's going to happen. And that's why you keep hearing, well, this is why this team would be favored on a neutral site. This team would be, oh, well, Ole Miss would just run through the ACC or whatever. Like, we're working so much on conjecture, and we're not going to have to work on conjecture forever. Some of these teams are actually going to play games that matter, that you can't sit here and say, oh, well, we didn't just care about that game. And look, yes, a lot of this conversation is just complaining about the SEC and the fans and everybody who just thinks, well, if we're doing it in the SEC, like it must be different. Nothing has radicalized me this season more about the SEC than people trying to be like, well, like, the 4th best team in the SEC this year is probably South Carolina. Oh, well, they must be really good. They must be really good. Hey, guess what? If they're the 4th best team in the SEC, they must be amazing. They must have really good wins. And it's like, dude, maybe all these teams just aren't that good this year. Maybe there are some teams that have some positives and have some negatives and can punch up and can also get beat from behind. And like, again, we're going to get to actually see it on the field this year in a way that we just don't usually get to.
So shifting over to the Big Ten, I know this is something you've commented on. The Penn State love. How are they able to remain so high at number 4, despite some games that have been, because that Minnesota game, I mean, to me, it was remarkable. Maybe it's because all of the chaos that happened after Indiana lost and then all the SEC teams decided to lose. We had this interesting game in the middle of all of this where Penn State survives by the skin of their teeth. And instead of going, how did Penn State get into that position at Minnesota? Minnesota is okay. They can scrape by USC, but they're not the team that you're worried about beating Oregon or anything like that. How did they manage to nearly beat this team? And instead, the way we've spun it is, wow, James Franklin finally played to win. They are awesome now. Is it remark? Am I the only one who thinks it's a little bonkers? Like that really is brand talking, it feels like, or just like James Franklin lowered everyone's expectations so far that surviving a game like that is actually, people are like, he did it, pat him on the back as though he just managed to pull off a win against Ohio State.
Yeah, it's really pretty unbelievable to watch Penn State continue to get this much credit, this level of credit. I mean, if you want to look at metrics like the SP Plus has Penn State as number 10, not number 4. It has them not just behind like some of the SC teams, it has them behind number 8 Miami. They're basically like within striking distance of Indiana. If you talk about just the advanced metrics, like it doesn't make any sense at all. And by the way, they have one ranked victory. It's against Illinois. And Illinois in the SP Plus is 42nd. Like the SP Plus says, no, actually, Illinois is not that good. They're just playing a very soft schedule and have a favorable record. And that's Penn State's signature victory at this point. I expected that Notre Dame was going to jump them after they demolished Army, because like one, I mean, that was a team that the committee had in the top 25. And two, like, I mean, I certainly expected Notre Dame to win that game, but they were really dominant. They played really, really well in that game. They played really, really well for essentially the last 9 games that they've played. I expected them to jump them, but instead we're sitting here with Penn State at number 4. I just don't really get it. And we've seen the committee has no problem sort of like glossing over win-loss record when you see a team that you don't necessarily think is as good as another team, even if they have a better record. I don't know why Penn State isn't in the like Georgia SMU conversation. Like I just don't really get why they're given that level of whatever you want to call it. Like it's just so odd to me. But you know what? Like it's good work if you can get it, I guess.
Do we need to say the same things about Texas?
It's a fair question. I mean, it's definitely a fair question. The nice thing, at least, is that we're gonna get to learn something about Texas when they travel on the road to play Texas A&M this week. So, I think that that's one thing that makes it slightly less frustrating. And look, I mean, when you look at some of these metrics too, like the metrics do love Texas. The metrics have Texas at number 4 in the SP Plus. They have them at number 1 in the Football Power Index. Like, so at least there's like sort of this case of like, oh wow, they've been tremendously dominant whenever they've played. I still think that Texas should be like, I don't think that Texas, from my perspective, should be considered a tier above Georgia. Like I think that Georgia should be in that tier. I think that they should be in the same conversation with Notre Dame. I think that they're closer to that range. Again, if we're going to sit here and kind of say, well, like for everybody else, record doesn't matter, and having big wins and playing well overall is enough. Like I don't get the logic of why Texas and Penn State are held separate from that versus, again, like Miami or SMU or, I mean, again, all the teams that we've talked about over and over again. So I think that, like, look, if Texas beats A&M and beats Georgia, obviously they're the number 2 team in the country, and there's no question about it.
How though? But, I mean, let's be straight here. Texas A&M is not a great team. I mean, they're 3 losses. They beat LSU and Mizzou. I mean, cool.
Well, they're number what 20 right now in the rankings, and so like
Texas will probably knock them out if they win. That's the thing.
No, they will. Well, and I mean, even if A&M beats Texas and loses to Georgia, I don't think that they're making the field. I don't.
Yeah.
But so it's not that they're a playoff level team, but it would be a quality win. It wouldn't be an amazing win, but it would be a quality win. And then they'd have a chance, of course, for Texas to go play Georgia. And if Texas beats Georgia, then I don't like, again, they're going to be the SEC champion. Like they're going to be a 12-1 team with a win over Georgia. And I think that that'll be enough to at least hold off the winner of SMU versus Miami. So they'll be the 2 seed. Like they will.
Yeah,
But
no, I agree. It's so funny though to think about that because I'm like, man, I wonder how the second time against Georgia would go for Texas in this particular regard.
yeah, it
But
might go bad. And actually, I think that's an interesting conversation to have. I will say so. So CFP chair Ward Manuel was asked, like, do you guys do sort of like hypotheticals or like, what if this team was on this field? And they're like, no, we don't, because like obviously we can't know the answer to that, which is the correct answer. Um, we don't have to play by those rules though. So here's a scenario, right? Texas beats Texas A&M, let's say in a really close game, like and it's a rivalry game. It's
yeah,
the
exactly.
first one back of these.
Scores a
Like,
little
you
less.
don't
Yeah.
hold, yeah, you don't hold it against them certainly, but like you get a little bit of credit, right? Let's say it's another 2-point win. Let's say it's 27-25, like the last one in 2011, and then you play Georgia and you don't look as bad as you did in the last one, but you lose by 10 points. Let's say it's a 30-21 game, right? Where does Texas land? Because their best data point would be a close win against Texas A&M. Other than that, they haven't played a lot of other teams that will finish with winning records at this point, but they've been dominant in those games. So, and let's just assume like shock holds everywhere else, right? That we don't see another crazy thing happen that there's. So where do you think that Texas would be, and where do you think that they should be?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. I was actually, as we were talking about this, the fact that they're beating certain teams the way they should beat them, I feel like we're almost describing Indiana in some regards. Like, oh, when they played a really good team, they weren't that great, but they could have they weren't quite up to it, but they had no problem beating everybody else. And you can certainly say that about Texas because Vandy gave them a bit of a scare, but Vandy is no one knows what to make of Vandy right now. I'll give them credit on that one. Certainly beating the Michigan team that they beat and didn't end up being as impressive. And again, some of this isn't their fault. I'm going to just say that right now. I say that for every team in this position. So I think they certainly should be in the playoff. I think I just get a little bit of sticker shock when you say number 2 because I'm like, I don't know. I mean, I guess at least Georgia would, and that's the wild thing about it. How far would Georgia move down in that scenario? Like they probably wouldn't move down that far because Texas is number 2, not because Texas has done it, probably number 3, not because Texas has done incredible things, but because inertia has kept them at number 3. It's utterly fascinating to see that. But I don't want to belabor this too much because I do want to give us a chance to talk about some of the games coming up this week. So we're going to take a quick break. We'll come back and we'll talk about the bevy of games coming up in this final week of the regular season here on the College Football Survivor Show.
The College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line.
Okay, so it's incredible, and I said it earlier on when we started this particular episode, but the wonderful thing about the 12-team playoff is there are so many games this week that actually have an impact on who might end up in the college football playoff bracket, let alone the conference title games, because they are part of it. For some of these, we need to know which teams are even in the conference title game. Some it's clear, like the American, we already know who's there. Some it's the Big 12, which is Big 12 has become a meme in and of itself. It's fantastic. I love it. I love that chaos. All of that said, we're going to go through a bunch of games. We're not going to necessarily break them down. We're going to talk about the worthiness of watching them. I think we're going to go like a scale of 1 to 5 on upset value. Potentially that we'll see a team that's going to surprise us and step up there and particularly create an upset victory that we're going to be talking about. And with a team that is relevant in the playoff conversation. Maybe not in the top 12 right now, but could be. And that starts with Thanksgiving. We have Memphis in their, again, it's funny to think of it as Thanksgiving game, but Memphis 9-2, 5-2 in the American, playing 9-2 Tulane, number 17. Of course, they're undefeated in the American. Their only 2 losses, as we mentioned, are to 2 P4 teams. Tulane is favored by about 14 points, about 13.5 points. So it is supposed to go to them. And obviously Tulane is sitting here licking its chops, hoping for mistakes either in the Mountain West or in the Big 12 to take that spot. What do you think? How would you rank this game in terms of potential upsets?
Yeah, I think that I'd probably give this one about a 2. I think that line is a little too big, certainly. Like, I don't think this is going to be a 2-touchdown game. And I mean, look, when you look at Tulane's resume, they played really well against their power conference opponents in Oklahoma and Kansas State. They really had a chance to win both of them. And I mean, look, since then they've been pretty dominant. Like you look over the past 3 weeks, it's 34-3 against Charlotte, 52-6 against Temple, 35-0 against Navy. But like they also haven't really played since Louisiana, probably like a top half team in the country. And so eh, I think that I think that certainly Memphis is going to be able to get more against them than some of those other teams, but I just don't think that Memphis is going to be able to get enough stops to really give themselves a chance. So I give it a 2 out of 5.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm not very much expecting Memphis to do a whole lot. I mean, they haven't been terrible, but this has been a bit of a letdown because Memphis, especially heading into this season, seemed to be one of those teams that would be in Tulane's position or even challenging Boise State. Friday, there's good games on Fridays, but really only 3 that are going to be, I think, relevant to the conversation, and some are still at the edge. The first one would be a crippling upset for Boise State. Oregon State, 5-6, is going for bowl eligibility in Boise, playing number 11 Boise State, 11-1. It's technically not a conference game, but it's a game where, well, if Oregon State pulls it off, there's some serious changes that are going to be occurring. I'd personally give that one a 1. I just don't think Oregon State has a reasonable chance there. Boise State's favored by 19. What are you thinking about that one?
Well, Oregon State is just off of winning the Pac-2 championship after upsetting
They are a
Washington
conference
State
champion,
last week.
yes.
They are, and I do think that like that showed me something, right? Like that was real. What happened against Washington State. I think Boise State is certainly better than Washington State right now. But I mean, Boise State's not playing their best ball right now, especially with Ashton Jeanty a little bit hobbled. Now, I think that being able to plan for a game where you're a little hobbled versus it happening during a game is certainly a different circumstance. But I give this one a 2. I don't think it's impossible because of the way that Oregon State plays offense, and I expect a good defensive game plan. I just don't think that Oregon State has the bodies to keep up with Boise State right now.
If we could somehow get the Washington State QB on Oregon State's team, then I would give them a better chance. But their QB throws way too many interceptions. I think Boise State will be ready. Defense will be the one. And Boise State's defense has been keeping them in all of these games.
Yeah.
Where Ashton Jeanty has not been able to play to his full level due to being banged up. So.
Hey, but you know what? This is as good a running back matchup as we're going to get between pseudo Mountain West teams. Anthony Hankerson for Oregon State is a big time player, but I think that from my perspective, if you could get John Mateer and like play him as a 12th man at linebacker, that's probably a little bit more helpful. But yeah, it'll be an interesting game. But I think that Boise State's going to win.
Okay, the next one we should probably hit on is, again, one of the many potential Big 12 games, but this is Colorado. It's hosting a complete disaster of Oklahoma State, although Oklahoma State will occasionally get close. They nearly beat BYU at one point, but they are still 3-8 and 0-8 in the Big 12. Colorado it's clear and the thing is, their talented players things just aren't working out, and Kansas is also just terrifying, apparently right now. Do we think there is any chance of Oklahoma State knocking off Colorado, or will Colorado keep themselves at least in the periphery of this Big 12 hunt?
Yeah, let me tell you guys a name to keep an eye on. Maya Luwaki Smith, the quarterback, the freshman from Oklahoma State, who started his first game against Texas Tech last week and kind of completely unlocked the Oklahoma State offense. He was 26 of 35 for 316 and 2 touchdowns last week. And by the way, his presence also opened up running lanes for Ollie Gordon, who finished with 156 yards and 3 touchdowns. That said, Texas Tech, I believe that Texas Tech and Oklahoma State are both bottom 5 national defenses in the entire country. So I would probably be a little hesitant to believe that that Maya Luwaki Smith is just going to come in and save everything for Oklahoma State. But, I do think that this is I think that Oklahoma State was in rage quit mode after especially that Baylor game, like over their last 2 against Arizona State and TCU. They kind of just stopped trying to play football. This was life. So I'm going to bump it from a 1 to a 2 because I see a pathway to there being a shootout. But I think that Colorado will take care of business.
Yeah, I think Colorado's going to take care of business. I'm putting this one at 1. Maybe I'm just very skeptical of it. I'm not sure.
It is the
So
Big 12, man. You just don't know. You just don't know.
we're going to skip the Egg Bowl because it doesn't matter who wins that game at this point. I think they're just not going to. I don't think Ole Miss is a part of the conversation anymore unless we see complete and utter chaos. I'd rather get some more important games. One of which, clean old-fashioned hate, Georgia Tech, completely weird team in the sense of, are they the ones that broke Florida State? Who knows? But they're heading in to Athens to play the Dogs. Obviously, unsurprisingly, Georgia's favored by a significant amount. Like they're over 3 scores. Actually, 3 scores, about 19 and a half, 20-point favorites. But Georgia Tech knocked off Miami. They certainly can do it. Is it enough, though? Do we think Georgia is now locked in? First of all, Georgia couldn't lose this game. It doesn't matter. I mean, in terms of being an SEC champ, but losing this game wouldn't be necessarily great if they then lose the SEC title game. So you don't want to be a 4-loss team. You don't want to have that conversation. What do you think? Georgia's going to take care of business?
I will point out last year, a Georgia Tech team that I would consider to be pretty notably worse played Georgia, who was notably better, to 31-23. So, like, I do think that Georgia Tech is going to be up for this game. I think that when you look at a 19-point line in most places, that's way too many points for me. I think that Georgia Tech is going to hang on to the ball. They're going to keep it relatively close. I think that I'm trying to figure out whether a 2 or a 3. I think I'm going to bump this one up to a 3 because I think that Georgia has some very legitimate problems. The issue I think for Georgia Tech is actually going to be, I don't know whether they're going to be able to get enough stops in this game. I think that this could be a little bit of a coming out party for Georgia's running game, especially, but I do think that Georgia Tech is going to make things a lot uglier than they need to be. And like you mentioned, I mean, they beat Miami earlier this season. They gave Louisville a run for their money earlier this season. They're a pretty good team. So I think that there's something here, but I don't know if it's going to be quite enough to actually pull off a victory.
Yeah, I'm not sure they have the ability to stay consistent enough to perform at that level one more time. But, if you're going to do it, you do it against a rival. I'll give them a 2. I feel like I'm a little more skeptical, but at the same time, I give this one a better shot than some of the others we've talked about. So now moving over to Saturday, the game, Michigan versus Ohio State. I mean, this is the game Ohio State has been circling for year after year after year. It almost feels like really everything they've done is simply to win this game. I mean, winning the rest of the games afterwards would be nice, but they're 21-point favorites. Michigan, though, still has that defense. Could it be a bad day on the Ohio State offense? The problem is they have so much talent on that offense. How many people would have to have a bad day? Can they do it? Can Michigan potentially upset Ohio State?
No, this one's a 0. This one is this is not happening. And for a number of reasons. I mean, one, just like the football matchup is what it is. But I think that Ryan Day is going to try to drop 50 in this game if he can. And the issue is I don't know. Thinking of the worst possible scenario, right? Let's say that Will Howard throws 3 interceptions and let's say they're all pick sixes. Is Michigan going to score more than 24 points in that scenario? I just don't think that Michigan has any offense. And you look at where Ohio State has struggled at times this year. Their cornerbacks have had some issues when left on islands, for sure. Their offensive line definitely has some issues. So I could see Ohio State struggling to run the ball in this game. But I think it's kind of like in that Indiana game where they just are okay, we'll just throw it for 8 yards every single play. And outside of Will Johnson, I just don't think that Michigan's that special in the secondary this year. So I mean, if Ryan Day loses this game again, he is going to be shot into space, and I don't think that he would like that. So this is a 0. They're not going to lose this.
That'll make Purdue jealous because suddenly they'll have a famous astronaut at Ohio State.
I know UCF will be punching air, and
oh my goodness, oh my gosh. So yeah, no, I'll still give it a 1. I don't know. I could see it's just so many sometimes teams get so in their own head, things just go completely haywire. It can happen, but oh my, I doubt it. But if it does happen, everyone like go to any social media you use. I don't care what it is, and just enjoy what's going on with the Ohio State fans because I don't even know what to even expect. Like I'm actually terrified of what might happen if they end up losing that one at home no less. Oh my goodness. They're going to storm the field, not in a good way. Not in a good way. Moving on, we've got number 8 Tennessee. I love this. They're heading to Vandy, but Vandy, who wants to play Vandy at home? Alabama sure didn't. Texas escaped that particular event. We have a game where Tennessee, which as we talked about, kind of just benefited from the fact that the rest of the SEC kind of threw up over itself and found itself in the top 10. Is it worthy of being a top 10 team? Vanderbilt's probably good enough test for them. Not necessarily the best test, but better than some of the others. Certainly better than, as we said, Ole Miss. What do you think? What are the chances the Doors have here?
Yeah. So if you look at our friends over at College Football Insiders, they give Vandy a 40% win probability in this game, and they actually project the game to be within 3.9 points. And that is not what you want to hear if you're Tennessee. It's not. Now, look, I don't know if Vandy has the horses to get it done. The tough matchup is going to be, I think, Vandy's offense, especially their rushing offense against Tennessee's defense, because I think Tennessee's defense is one of the best in the entire country. But, like, this is, I mean, there's been a lot of them, but, like, this is probably the real biggest game of Diego Pavia's career. Because, yes, of course, they beat Alabama. I mean, that's he'll talk about that for the rest of his life, no matter what. But if you knock Tennessee out of the playoff, like they're, I don't even know what they do at Vanderbilt. Like it would be crazy.
You run for the mayor of Nashville at that point.
Yeah, like that's it would be crazy. Like I don't know. I don't know again if Vandy's going to have the juice to pull it off, but it is in Nashville, which I think is a huge deal in this matchup. I think if this was in Knoxville, it's much tougher. And like this Tennessee offense is a mess right now. Like they are not good at all. You even mentioned that UTEP game. They were scoreless all the way through the first quarter and really only late in the second quarter kind of finally had their barrage of points against UTEP last week. So I think that this offense has some real issues. I'm going to put this at a 4. I think that Vandy absolutely has the ability to pull this off, and what a loss it would be for Tennessee if it happened.
I agree with you. I'm putting this one at a 4. I think it's certainly possible just because of Diego Pavia and the way Vandy plays. And this is such a big game. And in the biggest games, they have been playing some of their best football. So I think, ever since they had that upset to open the season, they have been absolutely just surprising everyone. It's just that as long as Georgia State isn't walking against they're not playing that team, they're okay. If it's a team they know to rise to the occasion, and that's a great statement, I think, for Clark Lee, if anything else. Now let's talk about a game that I think we're talking about brand names overwhelming and getting teams ranked higher than they are. This is the game that is being totally hosed because everyone's obsessed with Texas and Texas A&M, and that is actually the most important game of the day, in my opinion. South Carolina, number 15, 8-4, heading to play Clemson, 9-2, number 15 versus number 12. This is like a playoff elimination game. This is like a serious game, and it's a close spread. It's like, I think Clemson by 3, which is perfect because that's I couldn't imagine a big spread in this game. To me, this is like the number 5 on 5 in terms of upset ability. If it's even an upset, it should be a pick 'em, quite frankly. I mean, hot team with South Carolina, a Clemson team that has been suspect against tough opponents. Both of them can really answer something here. Who do you think is going to pull this one off?
This is going to be a crazy matchup. This is going to be one of the biggest ones of these games that we've ever seen. And like we talked about, I mean, Clemson is not battle tested. They have not played good teams since they lost 34-3 against Georgia in the opener. And, South Carolina, like it's been up and down, but especially in the month of November, they've pulled something together. And, you kind of look at some of these stats of Lenoris Sellers in the month of November, especially, like he is elevating himself into passing as well as anybody in the country right now. I think that where this game is going to be won, though, or lost, is specifically the Clemson running game versus the South Carolina rush defense, because South Carolina is so scary from a passing game perspective, right? Like the way that they rush the quarterback is insane. Well, Clemson is comfortable running Cade Klubnik. Like they are comfortable, misdirecting and getting him out of harm's way. And so I think this is going to be a big game about whether Cade Klubnik can extend plays. I think that if this game is played straight up, like I think that South Carolina is probably a little better, but I think that Clemson might be able to ride with the punches a little better. I don't even like this one. You can't try to rate it on an upset scale because like it's just a tight matchup. I think I go back and forth about this. I think I lean Clemson. I think, but I don't know. Like it's going to be a really close game. For the record, College Football Insiders has it at South Carolina with a 56% win probability.
Really? I'd give Clemson just a little bit of an edge being at home too. I think that's going to be a part of it. I think they're going to be playing for just the pride and just the sheer. It's a good rivalry. So I'm looking forward to that one. We're going to just glance over by Penn State because again they're favored by well over 3 scores against Maryland. So again, not going to move the needle much. We should say a brief word about Notre Dame, number 5, going to USC. It's a rivalry game. Yeah, USC is 6-5, but we joked about this. Could they, even in our last episode, I mean, like how the committee will say if USC pulls this upset, how they've led in the fourth quarter in every game. Even when they've lost. Do we think what we don't have to get into the details of it, but what ranking would you give it in terms of the upset scale? I'm thinking I would give this one a 3. I don't quite feel comfortable enough with USC to go higher than that, but I don't feel like I would be shocked if they managed to pull an upset against the Irish at home.
Well, and USC has led in almost every single game that they've played this year and just choked it away every single time. So I think that what'll be interesting is if USC jumps out to a big lead early, and if Notre Dame has to play from behind. Do they keep playing patiently or do they rush things? I think that that Notre Dame will win this game, but I think that a 3 is also about right.
Yeah. Moving to one of the more important ACC games, that's just all ACC. We have Miami, number 6, 10-1, heading to Syracuse in the Dome, 8-3. They've talked about feeling like they're a little disrespected in the rankings because they're not ranked at 8-3, but going 4-3 in conference can do that. How likely do we think the Miami Hurricanes have of just finishing this out and punching their ticket into the title game?
Yeah, I put this one also at about a 3. I mean, Miami's defense has really struggled in the second half of the season, and Kyle McCord is throwing the ball around as much as anybody in the country right now, not named Cam Ward. In fact, I need to check the stats. This might be the number 1 versus number 2 passer in the country right now in terms of total yardage. Yes, it is. And the funny thing is, Kyle McCord is the one who's number 1 and Cam Ward is number 2. So that should tell you a little something. Kyle McCord also, though, by the way, he has thrown for just under 4,000 yards through 11 games, which is insane. He also is I think that he leads the nation or is really close to the national lead in interceptions with 12 right now.
Think that. So this is that Pitt game, 5 interceptions, and 3 pick sixes.
Yes, no, and so like this is a can you rattle and turn over Kyle McCord, because then it's like a non-issue. Then you cruise to this win. But I think that a 3 is about right.
Yeah, and I like that because it was interesting. We had Brent Axe doing an AMA, who's a big Syracuse writer and a podcaster over in obviously the Syracuse area, and he said the one thing that Syracuse has is a quarterback who can stand up to Cam Ward, and I think that's certainly possible. I think a 3 is a safe bet. Cal, again, the fact that they beat Stanford, managed to put FSU as the very first team to ever finish number 17 in the ACC, which again, for the Schadenfreude with SMU being on the other end of it. Cal's going to play SMU. I don't think we need to maybe talk too much about that. Although the spread is only 2 scores. It isn't as big as you would expect. Do we think Cal has really any realistic shot here? I mean, they did scare Miami. But they also lost to Florida State. So I really have no idea where to even expect Cal. All I know is that the memes still keep coming out, so it has been enjoyable.
Yeah, the big one that I saw this week was the Schwarzenegger the two arms one, and where yeah it was Cal and SMU
Against the
uniting
death
over
penalty.
hating the death penalty. I love that one. That was really good. Yeah, so I mean, Cal has the ability to get stops. I think that actually what's going to be the issue is I just don't know whether they're going to be able to score enough points against SMU. SMU can score points in a hurry, even if they get down. I still think that, like, when you look at the quality of Cal, like, they're like, I need to check their point differential, but it's like, it's pretty good. The issue is that they lose all their close games right now. And SMU's been really, really good in close games because of their ability to create explosive plays. So I'll put this at like a 2, maybe. I just don't know whether Cal has the goods.
I agree with the 2. I would do a 1 if SMU wasn't already in the title game. Now there's that chance that they could be a little lackadaisical, but we hope not, because again, you want to be in a position where even if you lose that game, you have a chance of staying in.
Yes.
Iron Bowl. This is an interesting one. I honestly didn't think this game would be as interesting, but with Alabama losing to Oklahoma and Auburn upsetting Texas A&M, suddenly, I mean, I'm looking at the fact that, of course, they are playing it in Tuscaloosa. Alabama's favored by like 11.5, but I don't know, man. They hired Hugh Freeze at Auburn because he can beat Alabama, and this is starting to feel like a weird vibe heading into this game. I'm not sure. What do you think?
I'm going to read a tweet from David Hale from over at ESPN. Since going up 28-0 against Georgia in the second quarter of their Week 5 game, Alabama has scored 171 points against FBS competition and allowed 160, which puts them approximately in the same points margin over that span as Auburn. So, again, we're going to have this conversation on Selection Sunday of like, well, how can you leave Alabama out of the field? And the answer is that they've kind of sucked lately. They have not played very well against much of anybody. And again, like, the big game that they played well, or I guess the 2 big games that they played well, were against a Missouri team who I think that we can agree is one of the worst teams to be ranked in the past couple of years, who just is coasting by on having an easy schedule. And then at LSU, who is just falling apart right now. And outside of that, it's a loss to Vanderbilt. It's a 2-point win over South Carolina. It's a loss to Tennessee. And it's a 3-touchdown loss to Oklahoma. So anyone who sits here and says, oh, well, Alabama's just going to run away with this game has not been watching much Alabama this year and just sees the logo on the side of their helmet. Now, look, I think Alabama's going to win. I think they're better. But Auburn, like you mentioned, hired Hugh Freeze to do literally one thing. And everything about this season for Auburn has been miserable, right? Like, has been so bad, so miserable, so underwhelming. But something to point out, after they pulled off that upset against Texas A&M in quadruple overtime last week, they can make a bowl if they beat Alabama, which would have been unthinkable a couple of weeks ago.
How perfect would that be? You go bowling and you knock Alabama completely out of the playoff conversation. And that will make the offseason for Auburn right there.
And the other thing too is that Auburn was probably slightly better last year. It's kind of, I go back and forth on that.
That was a game.
But Alabama was obviously way better last season. And Alabama needed 4th and 31 is what it was, right? To win that game. And I mean, like, look, I think that for upset purposes, I would prefer that this game's at Jordan-Hare, but like, I don't think, I mean, I'm a big Kalen DeBoer fan. I've been very upfront about that all season long. But like, I'm curious if he knows the snake pit he's about to walk into. Like, just in terms of this rivalry. Like, I think that it's just hard to know what this rivalry is the first time that you play in it. And again, like Auburn's gonna be like bringing out just the deepest depths of their playbook, stuff that Hugh hasn't called in 12 years, because they are going to be trying everything to get this win. And by the way, the one thing that I'll mention too is when Peyton Thorne doesn't turn over the ball, they're not that bad. Like they're not that bad. They're not good. They're not good. Like they're not good. I want to be clear about that. But like I think that they're more I think that they're better on offense than people realize when they take care of the ball. And the other thing too is in the second half of the year, and I mentioned this on Split Zone Duo when I went on earlier this year, they finally were like, oh, I guess our best players are running back. Let's give him the freaking ball. And that's also, I think, helped them in some big spots as well. Last week against Texas A&M, 28 carries, 130 yards, 3 touchdowns. So I think that we're going to get a lot more of that. I'm going to put this one at a 5. Like it's the Iron Bowl. And it's I'm not saying that Alabama's going to lose this game, but like it's going to be bad feelings. I know that much.
I'm on the 4 side of it, and I think Mr. Hunter could be a big part of that. Absolutely. So moving along to Arizona State, again, they suddenly have a very ability to control their destiny. They're not favored by that much in the Territorial Cup. They're only favored by a little over 1 score at Arizona, despite Arizona being one of those disappointing teams that have been picked to finish towards the top. Instead, they're 4-7, 2-6 in the Big 12, but they have talent. They just can't seem to do anything at any given time. What do you think? I mean, I personally put this a little lower. I almost put this as I would be tempted to say a 2, but maybe Vegas knows something I don't. Probably a 1, but maybe Vegas knows something I don't. I'm going to put it at a 2, but I see Arizona State having bloodlust. Kenny Dillingham, is a passionate dude. I know they'll have to say no pity for the kitty, and I just don't see. I could see the Sun Devils running rampant right there.
So I think that the one thing that I'd point to is that when you look at Arizona State, they're very average against the pass. They're 10th in the Big 12 out of 16 teams in passing defense. At the same time, they also know that they only have to cover one player on Arizona, and nobody else is even potentially going to get the football. I don't know if you realize this. Tetairoa McMillan has more than 1,200 yards, and nobody else on the team is more than like 300. Like he has 4 times as many yards as everybody else. So I do think that we're going to see a legendary Tetairoa McMillan performance. I do, because it'll be his last game in an Arizona uniform. I also think that he could have 250 and 2 touchdowns, and it might be a 41-14 game. Like that might be what we're looking at. So I'm gonna, like, it is a rivalry game, and I also don't think that Arizona State is so good that like they're just untouchable. So I'll put it at a 2, but like more on the 1 side than the 3 side. I just think that Arizona State is going to be so fired up for this game.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I'm gonna, even though I don't expect Purdue to have any shot. This is kind of an interesting thing with Indiana.
0.
But here's the thing. No, but Indiana's favored by almost 30. After losing to Ohio State, does Indiana have to just blow out Purdue, like try and go way over that to remind people that no, we do throttle the teams we're supposed to throttle, because they're at 10. Like there could be some machinations where they get pushed down for the sake of who knows, like South Carolina if they win or something like that. Does Indiana need to really just go and break Purdue in ways that maybe go to medieval torture levels of destroying someone on the wheel?
Well, one, I don't think that Indiana needs to try to make that happen. I think that Purdue is perfectly happy.
It helps
to help
the other
them
team
out.
that's sitting up is in the Purdue uniform. Yes.
Yeah, I posted this. I posted this last week when I was watching. Who were they playing last week? I can't remember. But the thing about the Big Ten that's hilarious to me, as somebody who mostly, obviously, they played Michigan State last week, and they actually didn't look terrible. But the thing that makes me laugh about Big Ten football, as somebody who more grew up watching Southern football, is like when things are bad, it's hilarious because it's so cold and they look miserable. Ryan Walters looked like the unhappiest man in America during the first half of that football game. Like he just looked exasperated. He looked miserable. So I do think that I think that if Indiana were to win this game by less than 20 points, I think that people would kind of side eye it. I do think too, like if you're Indiana, I mean, this has been such a special year for you, and it's senior day. I imagine at Indiana, it's the last regular season game. I mean, here's the reality, right? This might be the best team that Kurt Signetti ever coaches. Not because like he can't have other good teams, but like this is a special team. This is a
Yeah.
really, really good team. They have a chance to win 11 games on Saturday, and so I don't think they're going to waste that opportunity. I think that they're going to come out, really play together, really try to get back on track. I think more than trying to prove something to the committee, I think that they also just want to like they also just want to get back to business for themselves. And I feel like also it's going to feel really good for Indiana's offense to go against a defense. It's not Ohio State's this week. So I do think that they win big, and I do think it would help if they like. I mean, we have the example right of Notre Dame coming back after losing to Northern Illinois, and they beat Purdue 66-7. So I don't know if there's anything that's going to be impressive enough to like make a difference, but I do think that there's an unimpressive enough that could.
Big game in Texas. You're going to be there. Texas, number 3, at number 20, Texas A&M. If Texas A&M beats Texas, and then gets blown out of the SEC title game, we've talked about that. Will it be better for them to have not participated at all in the SEC title game? Is all I keep thinking. Because I mean, if they go, but we'll set that aside. What do we think is going to come out of this game? I mean, Texas is favored by about 5.5 or something like that. Unsurprising. This is a close one. It should be a close one, because it's been so anticipated for so long. And I do get that. I isn't to me the most compelling, objectively ranked game right now, but it is certainly a great story in all the other ways. And it is going to probably decide absolutely who's going to face Georgia in the SEC title game. What do you make of this? I mean, what are the upset odds? Can A&M do this at home? And that's probably what's giving them the only 5.5 point spread, probably edge there.
Well, people might have seen last week, Mike Elko was asked about the Auburn game being a look ahead spot, and he said, "We are completely focused on Texas. I mean Auburn." And I think that that's a pretty good indication of what's been going on in Aggieland the past few weeks. This is, I mean, well, I'll tell you to keep your eyes out on CBSSports.com on Thanksgiving for a story on how big this game is. But there is a very legitimate case that this is the biggest game in the history of the rivalry, or at least in like 50 years. Because the reality is these two teams are rarely good at the same time. It's actually been since 1975 that both teams won double-digit games in the same season. And you had a period of success for Texas A&M between like 85 and 95. You had a period of success for Texas in the 2000s. Both teams were kind of starting to figure themselves out at the end of the 2000s when you obviously get to the final one of these games. And we spent 13 years having proxy wars about this game, whether it's hiring each other's baseball coaches or winning recruiting battles or whatever it is. Like, this is going to be an anticipated game. And so I mean, I think that you have to put it on the 5 meter because like it's just that kind of game. Now, I do think like I considered giving it a 4 because I think that Texas might just be a lot better. They might be, but like Texas A&M has some real advantages too. Like we've seen the way that Texas offensive line has been inconsistent the past few weeks. Well, Nick Scorton is maybe the best individual edge rusher that they will play this year. Like he's that good. You look at obviously Texas A&M with Marcel Reed. I think that they're going to be able to do some dynamic things in the quarterback run game. That'll be a fantastic matchup to watch. Now, I mean, look, I think that obviously it took away a little bit of juice that Texas A&M lost last week to Auburn in quadruple overtime, but it also adds some juice that the loser of this game goes home. And you mentioned the conference championship game piece. Look, if Texas A&M finished 9-3 and beat Texas in the last week and didn't play for a conference title, I don't think they're in regardless. Like they're number 20 right now. I don't think they're in regardless. I don't think it makes any difference whatsoever whether they are losers of the SEC title game versus not participating. They have to win the SEC title game to get into the college football playoff, sitting right now at number 20. But I think it's going to be an incredible game. I think it's got a lot of juice. Although I will say, look, this is a good game, but have we considered that the battle for the best Big 12 team is happening in Waco, Texas, between Baylor and Kansas? That might be the biggest game of the weekend too.
They're like the only non-ranked versus non-ranked that I was considering including here, because there's just I want to just pull them together. We have, because I mean, Kansas versus Baylor is going to absolutely potentially have a hiccup in this Big 12 title race. But we also have Houston at BYU. BYU's favored by 2 scores. But then Farmageddon, which is one of the tightest spreads. Iowa State, which is the home team, favored by 3 against visiting Kansas State. Like, of those games, like, I don't know. Like, there's some upset potential in all of them. I actually don't know. I assume, is Baylor favored against Kansas?
I think that they opened as small favorites, and Kansas has since overtaken them. I think that
wild.
it's a 1-point Kansas land.
This is the most
right
Big
now.
12 stuff ever. My goodness.
Yes,
Look at that. Yeah, Kansas is now favored by 1.5. I don't know. I just want to jump to the Farmageddon though. What upset alert do you put there? That feels like a pick 'em almost. It really does. Yeah. Especially even with that low of a spread.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like you said, I mean, this isn't an upset type game. These two teams are evenly matched. I go back and forth about this one. I go really back and forth. I think that, like, the question is going to be, to an extent, like, what is Iowa State's health on defense? Because that was really the thing that cost them down the stretch. But, like, again, we've mentioned, I mean, Kansas State is the highest ranked SP plus team in the Big 12 right now. They've had some big wins earlier this year. They're a good team, and when Avery Johnson is playing well, they're really, really tough to cover as well. So I think I lean Iowa State, but it's hard, man. By the way, Iowa State playing for 10 wins for the first time in program history.
Wild. That is absolutely wild. And yeah, they're aiming for that, first time in like over 100 years of potentially winning a conference title. So, it's going to be a great
1912.
Yeah, it's going to be a great race in this final week for the Big 12. Well, we've been going on for a little bit of time, but there were so many games to talk about, and we didn't even probably touch on all the ones we could have. We apologize if we've missed yours. We're going to have a lot of stuff to talk about in our next episode. So on behalf of all of us, we hope you're all having a great Thanksgiving holiday weekend. We hope you travel safe. We hope you're enjoying whatever you're doing right now as you're listening to us. And thank you for joining us. I want to thank our producer, Joey Aliberti. Be sure to like, rate, and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on X and TikTok at CFP Survivor Show. He's Shehan Jayaraja. You can find his work at cbssports.com and at Shehan Jayaraja on X and TikTok, as well as Blue Sky. I'm Bobak Hirey, part of the group that runs Reddit CFP. Thanks for joining us.
The College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line.